Last 3 years, I've been writing a book about our life with a homeless guy who knocked on our door one night at Christmas, and we invited him in and he never left. Lived this 45 years. I'll talk a little bit about him later on. And I've been doing that in conjunction with the university, because we're also looking at the effect that being in care has on children. I run a creative writing class in a high security prison, and about 25% of men in prison have a background in care. 25% of homeless people have a background in care. And Ronnie had spent all his early life in care. Had some educational challenges. So I decided to write this book called A Knock at the Door, which is this one you've got here. And HarperCollins bought the rights. Care for the Family, having all the royalties forever. And there's somebody's had a bit of a talk about it becoming a film, and if that happens, they'll have the rights to that as well. So we're not shy about mentioning it to people. But I'll tell you what would be an enormous help. What we're really trying to do is when it comes out on November the 21st, we're trying to get a big media kick. I've done a fair amount of media, done a fair amount of morning television, been on Today program, stuff like that. But you need a bit of push to get that. And if we can have a big push on the book the day it comes out, and that it hits the charts, that's easier to get on those things. And we can discuss the issue of kids in care. We've got a conference in the autumn in November at the Care of the Family headquarters with Safe Families at Home for Good. They're particularly devoted to keeping kids out of the care system. So if you feel like buying someone a Christmas present, you can go on that and pre-order it, and that will help, because that your sale will hit on November the 21st, even if you buy it now. And guys, this is true with all our stuff. If you can't afford it and you'd like it, when it comes out, get in touch with Care for the Family. We'll gladly send it to you free. So I'm not trying to get rich on anybody's back, but it will just help us. But I think you'll find it a really interesting story. It has lots of interesting bits in it. I'll talk a bit about it this morning. I discovered that my life and Ronnie's weren't that dissimilar in some ways, and I'll talk a bit about that. So let's just pray briefly and we'll start the seminar together. Our Heavenly Father, we ask for your mercy as we talk together now, and we pray that you will teach us, the great teacher, in Jesus' name. We pray the ancient prayer, deliver us from evil. We pray your blessing. Amen. Great. Well, it's lovely to be with you all. I want to talk to you about, and do you know what I feel about this session? It's not. I was saying to somebody earlier. I said, you know what? If I when I'm doing parenting seminars, if I give 15 tips to be an incredible parent, people are so bored they can hardly keep their eyes open. But if you're a bit vulnerable and you share things that you wish you'd learned and lessons, I think it's more helpful. We're all trying to get through as best we can. Somebody once said that parenting is 50% fear and 50% guilt. And I sometimes think that's a little light on the guilt side. Watch this. Men, fathers, put your hands up if you ever feel guilty. Yeah, okay, all right, hands up. Mothers, put your hands up if you feel guilty. That's true all over the world. Why do mothers particularly feel more guilty? Yeah, it may. I mean, a lot of guys put their hands up, but you have a sea of hands. One mother wrote to me, she said, I just feel so guilty all the time. Should I feel guilty when I drop them off? I feel guilty when I pick them up. I feel guilty about what they eat, what they don't eat, what they might eat. And somehow we got to lay that down. We're really all trying to get through as best we can. So I want to talk to you about some, just open and honestly, some big lessons. And first of all, I'd like to just remind you that there's all different parents and all different kids here today. There'll be single parents, parenting with a husband, wife, with a partner. There'll be grandparents, there'll be carers, adopted parents, foster parents, and all kinds of children. All kinds of children. So let me share my first one with you. And it's called, don't box them in. Don't box your kids in. When Ronnie came to live with us, it was amazing watching him. His self-esteem was through the floor. Just through the floor. He was about 29 years old when he came to us. And you heard me say yesterday, perhaps in the big top, he just never had a mother take him first day of school. Never had a dad say, how'd it go in the big school today, son? He'd never had any of that stuff. And his constant refrain to me was, I haven't done a bad thing. Have I done a bad thing? It was his constant message. And you know, well, I said to him one day, we're talking, and I said, hey, Ronnie, what was the name of the school you went to when you were a kid? And honestly, without blinking, he said, it was called the Backward School. I discovered that when he was age 11, Cardiff City Council thought it was a good idea to send him 200 miles away to a children's home that the subsequent report described as for subnormal boys. Their words, not mine. Shortly after he left, 3 of the carers were incarcerated for abusing the kids. They went down for a total of 30 years. And I'm saying they were there when he was there, but that's, I would guess, that was the ethos of that school. And he went through terrible abuse. All kinds of things, Ronnie, and his self-esteem was right through the floor. And so when I said to him, what was the name of your school? He said, the Backward School. And then I began to think, well, hang on a second, are our pasts that different? So when I was a kid, Mum was a cleaner, Dad was a postman. We lived in a little terraced house in Cardiff. We didn't have an inside toilet, running hot water. We didn't have a bathroom. We didn't have toilet paper. As I said the other day, don't even ask. But even now, I can't look at a copy of the South Wales Echo without a million memories coming flooding back. That was our life. But worse still, we didn't have any books. In fact, we only had 3 books. We had 3 books. We had a Bible that nobody read. My parents didn't go to church. We had an atlas and something called the doctor's book. And the doctor's book was so written that whatever disease you looked up, you had. And also the one on the facing page. So it was a scary book to consult. A bit like looking at the internet if you're ill today. Best not look at the internet, you're dying. It was that kind of thing. No books. Now listen, I desperately wanted to pass for the grammar school. There was something called the 11 plus then. No kid in our street had ever done it. It was Oscar Wilde who said this. There are 2 great tragedies in life. One is not to get the desire of your heart. The other is to get it. And he was right. I got the desire of my heart. The second I arrived in that grammar school, I knew I'd made a dreadful mistake. It was like, honestly, it was like arriving on a foreign planet. These kids had cars and telephones. They went on skiing holidays. They had more books than they could shake a stick at. It was just different. And on the first day of school, the teacher stood in front of the whole class and he said, I want you to shout out what your fathers do for a living. Fathers. Kid yelled out consultant. Somebody yelled out accountant, lawyer. I was panicking, honestly. I tried to keep my head down, and then he looked at a list, and he said, you Parsons, Parsons, isn't it at the back? Yes, sir. Parsons, what's your father do for a living? I mumbled, postman, as quietly as I could. And when I got home, I said to my father, hey, Dad, do you ever get bored just taking letters through doors? If I hurt him, he didn't show it. He said, son, your father delivers the Royal Mail. He made it sound as if the Queen herself had asked my old man, would he mind sticking some letters in as he walked around the streets? He said, armies depend on me, lovers depend on me, businesses depend on me, families depend on me. No, son, I don't get bored. You should see somebody waiting for a letter from me. And before he went to work, he'd let a white shirt and a black tie and trousers you could cut your finger on the creases. And then my father would shine his shoes. My father's shoes shone. One night I caught him cleaning the underneath of his shoes. And I said, Dad, don't do that. Nobody will ever know. He said, I'll know. I'll know. Do you know, some years ago I got invited to accept an award from the Queen on behalf of Care for the Family. And so you're face to face with her, yeah? And we have this little chat, and they were lovely and so forth. It's a bit scary because you have to call her the right name. So you're in a side room, and they say you call her, first of all, Your Majesty, and you bow from the head down if you're a guy. And then from then on, it's ma'am, but as in jam. So I'm in the side room, and I'm going, ma'am as in jam, ma'am as in jam. And I'm dead scared that when I meet her, I'm going to go, hello, jam. So I meet her, and we have this lovely conversation, and then... there's something on my heart I want to say to her, but I'm not sure if I'm going to have the guts to say it to her, but I really want to. So just as our conversation was coming to an end, I said, Mum, may I humbly thank you for the incredible example you've been to us all. And she smiled at me, and she said, you're very kind. But you know what I really wanted to say to her? I want to say, my father used to deliver your letters. I can't begin to tell you. Listen, teachers are my heroes, but it was a crueler era. I can't begin to tell you what that experience did to me as a child. And I'm saying this to you because you can interpret this for your own kids or kids you care about. But, in those days, they used to read out the class results beginning with the first. There were 34 kids in my class, 34 boys in my class. And it was a system designed both to honor and humiliate. And they're reading out beginning with the cleverest kid. And the cleverest kid always came first. You know that Lister was going to come first in everything, for goodness sake. And then Adamson, and then you think, I wonder if I was in the teens. You're not exactly sure how your exams have gone. I wonder if I'm in the teens, but you're not in the teens. And then the 20s, and your name's not in the 20s. And you start to panic. You can feel your chest wanting to explode. Your heart's pounding. And finally, just 2 kids left. Me and Arthur Harris. And I look across at Arthur, and Arthur looks at me. And suddenly I hear Arthur's name. And Arthur shrugs his shoulders. And 33 sets of eyes turn and look at me. The stupidest, the silliest kid in the class. That year, my form teacher, W.P. Lewis, B.A., as he used to sign his name. I won't tell you what my friend Charlie Harris told me that the B.A. stood for, which was extremely rude. He decided, when he wrote his comments on my report that year, he was going to move beyond my academic ability and take a stab at him guessing what either nurture or nature had brought into my life. And he wrote these words, and we'll get ready. I'll show it in a moment. I'll cue it up now. He wrote, a disgraceful report. He's making no use of what little ability he has. Let's have a look at that. You can hardly believe it. There we go, look. He's making no use of what little ability he has. And because he was a teacher, thanks a lot, because he was a teacher and I was a kid, I thought, well, he must be right. And when he did that for me, W.P. Lewis, B.A., created a box. And the bottom was disgraceful, and the sides were no ability, and the lid was no use. And because he was a teacher and I was a kid, I climbed in that box. And I thought, well, that's where I belong. And I lived in that box for a long time. I'll tell you in a moment about people who changed my life, who came into my life. I can remember I taught for a while, and I can remember when we were in training, them telling us of something called the self-fulfilling prophecy. You bring a child into a class and you say, this kid's brilliant. And so you give him extra work, and you say, this one's slow, and so you treat them. And sometimes the kids end up being what you've been told they are. Education's much more sophisticated now. But I honestly believe that I could achieve nothing. Nothing. I remember my friend Roy and I coming home from our O-level results, yeah? That was the old GCSEs. And Lister had got 10 or something, and Roy and I come home. He got 2, I got 3. And a half on O-level, something called special arithmetic, which was for kids who couldn't pass O-level maths but could at least count. And we come home with this little clutch of... And some years ago, I was lecturing in Bristol University to about 200 lawyers, because I eventually became a lawyer. And I was lecturing in Bristol University. I lectured to thousands of lawyers all over the world. And in the coffee break, I went up to the law department to see whether a rumor I'd heard was true. Because I remember a teacher looking at Roy and saying to him, you're a failure now and you always will be. And I heard that Roy was in the building. So I go up to the law department and I go past some doors, and one is a lecturer, senior lecturer, reader, and then I come to one marked professor of law. And I knock the door and I open it, and he's got his feet on the desk as he used to in chemistry. And I said, hello, Roy, you failure. And we both laughed like drains. What I'm really saying is this. It's easy to put kids in a box. We can do it as parents. If we're not careful, we say, this is the academic one, this is the sporting one. And even though I'm going to talk to you about testing children later on, we can too easily say, this is the one, and this is that one. And it's just a little too easy to do that. And we perhaps ought not to do it. We perhaps ought not. Do you know what? People put us in boxes. Even when we're older, people have tried to put you in boxes. A husband, a wife, an employer, a teacher, a friend will say, you should be like this, or this is you, or don't you dare attempt to do that. But life's not like that. You never know. Most of us who've achieved a little bit in life think that we're clever. The truth of it is we've been blessed normally by people coming into our lives who've changed us. I did all right. I became a lawyer. I ended up with a PhD. I did loads of stuff, in life. And whatever W.P. Lewis was right about, he wasn't right about that. This kid had a bit there that could be developed. We shouldn't put our kids in boxes. Second thing, I want to talk to you a little bit about the testing child. You know, I've talked to you and I've said that if you have more than one child, I mentioned it yesterday, you're likely to have chalk and cheese. Hands up if you've got more than one child and they're different characters, yeah? It's really interesting, isn't it? Now, it's not always the case. Some of you are, but let me say this in case I have a heart attack now and die before the end of the seminar. Don't take the compliant one for granted. It's easy to take the compliant one for granted, to think he or she is in the bag, but they're not. And it's not at all impossible that in late teens they have a little bit of rebellion, or perhaps just to show you they're not an easy touch. So don't take them for granted. Treat them well as well. But normally you have more than one child, you will have chalk and cheese. You occasionally meet people that doesn't happen to. They have a string of great kids. I remember a woman, she had 3 perfect children. They were. They were like I described yesterday. Save their pocket money for study guides, love church, just help with the dishes, polite, just 3 perfect kids. And she did used to give other people advice where they were going wrong. She was quite arrogant, to be honest. She sent out Christmas letters when it wasn't Christmas, telling us how well these people were doing and all this stuff. And then, bless her heart, when she was 45 years old, heaven sent her this little bundle out of the blue. Not quite out of the blue, but reasonably out of the blue. And this kid's sole purpose in life was to humble his mother, which he did with incredible ability. Incredible ability. You get that testing child if you hang around long enough. And it's fascinating to watch what happens with that child. Fascinating to watch what happens with that child. Now, think of the Bible and Peter. Think of the Apostle Peter. Imagine that you were Peter's mother, and imagine that there were school reports around in Peter's time, yeah? And you're Peter's mother. Dear Mrs. Levi, I'm sorry to tell you that Peter nearly ruined the transfiguration today with a silly comment on the mountain. Dear Mrs. Levi, I'm sorry to tell you that the master had to tell Peter to get behind him today. Dear Mrs. Levi, I'm sorry to tell you that Peter almost drowned today trying to walk on Galilee. Dear Mrs. Levi, I am very sorry to tell you today that Peter took somebody's ear off with a sword in the garden today. Dear Mrs. Levi, I am very sorry to tell you that Peter denied the master 3 times today. You get that all the time if you're Peter's mother. What does Jesus do? His arm on him. Hey, Peter, the enemy of your soul has decided he wants to have you and sift you like wheat. But I prayed for you. And when you come through this, strengthen your brothers and sisters. Strengthen them. And he sees something in this kid. He doesn't put him in that box. Sees something in him that can be done and can be there. And I'll tell you, never mind our kids. Some of us in this auditorium need that. We need to say, do you know, I spent too long in other people's boxes. And it was remarkable to see that happening. Now, there's some things with your testing kid. They're normally a surprise to you. Lloyd used to come to Spring Harvest. I've been to Spring Harvest for 40-odd years. I've been here a couple of times, and I love it here as well. But I can remember being at Spring Harvest, and Kate used to love everything. Oh, Daddy, the youth groups are lovely, and the Bible study's lovely. And Lloyd would come back from all his groups, boring. It's boring. And that was true from the time he was about 5 or 6 years old. And then he's about 16 or 17, and he's giving me a hard time. And I'm preaching at the Big Top. So there's 4,000 people in the Big Top. And Lloyd somehow has got to listen to me speak. So he's somewhere near the front row. And then when I finish speaking, somebody comes and makes a kind of ministry appeal. And they ask people to all stand, so 4,000 people stand. And then they say, and now if your heart's been touched by something Rob has said, and you want to commit your life to Jesus in a fresh way, I'd like you to sit. And I'm looking around, and I can see Lloyd out the corner of my eye. And after quite a long time, Lloyd sits. And a whole group of people gather around him and start to pray. I got tears. I'm on the stage. I got tears running down my face. And I say to him afterwards, son, what made you sit? He said, my knees were killing me. He'd hurt his knees in football. My knees are killing me. Yeah? That's the testing kid for you. Yeah? That's the testing kid for you. Now, let me just tell you a couple of things, though, with regard to the testing child. Number one, sometimes you have to take a second look. A second look. I'll tell you why. When they're 14, the tick boxes are easy. You want them to have a tidy bedroom, want to do their homework, want to clean the rabbit out on a Tuesday, not tuck their shirt in, not smoke. The tick boxes are easy when they're 14 or 15. But I'm telling you, those tick boxes won't be enough for you when they're 35. If when they're 35, they don't smoke, they get their reports on time for their boss, their bedroom's tidy, they clean the rabbit out on a Tuesday, and blah, 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 but they're arrogant and proud and rude, and they don't care for others, that won't be enough for you then. And here's the fascinating thing about the testing child. They often have those lovely qualities. They got big hearts. They can walk into a party and light it up. They're just big-hearted people. And sometimes we're so busy looking off our shoulder, ticking all those other boxes, we forget to commend them when they're doing well. You know, when Lloyd was 17, he saved up, it might have been almost 18, and he bought an old jalopy motor car. And he came home one day, he said, Dad, I was down the road in the car, he said, and I saw this old lady and she looked lost. And so I said, can I help you, my dear? And she said, I'm lost. He said, well, give me your name and address. Give me your address, I'll take you home, I've got a car. He said, Dad, I held the door open for her. She sat in. I drove her to her front door. I got her out the car. I walked up the front, right to her front door. And she said, this is not my house. And I said, well, where's your house? And she said, she gave me another address. I took her there. And she said, this is not my house either. She said, Dad, I took her to 4 houses. And in the end, I took her to a police station. Listen, he's smoking. His bedroom's a mess. He's not doing his college work. He's cheeky to his mother. And I'm not happy with any of that. But he says to an old lady, can I help you? I got to commend that. Because that's the heart. That's the heart. Do you know, I told you yesterday that we confuse often personality with spirituality. And a young 14-year-old boy starts coming to church, and perhaps he even gives his life to Jesus, and he comes to church. Now, we ask him to do several things then that he doesn't like doing. A lot of 14-year-old boys don't like reading very much, and there's quite a lot of reading even in the youth group, and they don't like listening to lectures, and there are quite a lot of lectures going on, and they don't much like singing. There's quite a lot of singing going on, and they certainly don't like sitting still. There's quite a lot of sitting still going on, and so when he's 16, he stops coming, and we call him a prodigal. But perhaps he just couldn't sit still. Now listen, he needs good teaching. It won't hurt him to read, of course. He needs to worship. But that same kid was the first person to go and visit his friend in hospital when his mate got knocked off a motorbike. That same kid will spend his last penny buying a copy of Big Issue. And Jesus said at the end of time, I was hungry and you fed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was in prison and you visited me. It matters. And it's not the other stuff doesn't matter, but that matters as well. And therefore, a key with our testing children, and this is my next very important point, at least I think is important, is you have to occasionally catch them doing something right. Well done. I was proud of you when you did that. Good job. I was having dinner with a businessman some years ago. I said, tell me about your kids. He said, I got 3 children. He said, I got a girl at 29, she's doing a PhD. I got a girl at 24, she's doing a master's. And then he picked up his knife and fork and started eating. I said, tell me about your third child. Oh, he said, I got a boy who's 19. Dyslexic, his bedroom's a mess. Gets car parking fines if he gets to pay them. He said, he don't get his college working on time. And I tell him, you better sharpen up, son. It's a tough world out there. I touched him on the arm. I said, sir, can you remember when you last praised that boy for anything at all? He said, I really can't. I said, what does he do well? He said, he's an incredible musician. He's a great guitarist. I said, when you go home, tell him you were boasting about him to the guy you were having dinner with. It will revolutionize your relationship with him. And to his credit, he said, I will. Listen to this. When the ear never hears praise, the heart loses the will to try. When the ear never hears praise, the heart loses the will to try. And particularly with our testing children, we've sometimes just got to make sure we catch them doing something right. With regard to our testing children, don't read their school reports as though they're a prophecy of their future lives. That was almost worth coming this afternoon for, wasn't it? In other words, don't read the score at halftime. School reports are important, but they only measure certain subjects at a certain stage of a child's life. They tend not to measure, for example, emotional ability. The ability to put deals together, to networks, a whole bunch of stuff they generally don't measure. Don't read the score at halftime. Now let me talk to you very briefly as I bring this point to a close and talk to you a little bit about teenagers, because this can be such a shocking time. A woman wrote to me and she said, I don't know how it happened. She said, when he was 12, he used to cuddle up to me on the sofa. He would love to talk to me. He would share his heart with me. Now, she said, he just looks at me as though he's discovered me on the bottom of his shoe. She said, he's so rude to me. And I can remember saying to her, well, there's no reason you need let him be rude to you, but you know what? It's hard for him and it's hard for you. He's trying to grow away from you into independence, and yet he still needs you. He still needs you. And she said, he's got this girlfriend now, and he's totally obsessed with her. And I said, you know the real problem? This may be true. The only woman he's ever really loved, and still does love, is his mother. But he knows he's got to move away from you. And so that's hard for you and it's hard for him. But cut him a bit of slack if you can. Don't let him be rude to you, but it's hard for him as well. His body's changing. You'd feel a bit awkward too if your legs and arms grew at a different rate to the rest of you. And what's going on in the brain? Wow, we all used to think that the brain was fully developed by about age 9. We knew there was a burst of brain activity around toddlerhood. And then MRI scanning came along. And suddenly we were able to look into the brains of thousands of teenagers. And what neuroscientists discovered was fascinating. They discovered a similar burst of brain activity, similar to around toddlerhood, in the early years of puberty. But whereas in the toddler years, that brain growth had to do with balance and movement, in the early teenage years, it had to do with emotion and memory. The bit that looked after the emotions was physically changing. If being around your 14-year-old daughter is like sitting at the foot of a volcano, that's why. And the last bit to develop in the brain is in the prefrontal cortex. And psychologists call this the brain's policeman. It's the bit of the brain that gives us common sense. Literally. And it's just developing. Our teenagers are literally a work in progress. That's why we say, how can you think of skateboarding off a 10-foot high wall? Why do you put your seatbelt on? How can you think of going clubbing the night before your GCSE maths exam? Mum, the exam is not till the afternoon, for goodness sake. That bit of the brain is still physically growing. And so one woman, I wrote in a book called Teenagers, What Every Parent Has to Know, and one woman wrote to me, she said, I read the chapter on the brain. What a relief it was to know not only is it not all my fault, it's not all his fault either. That bit of the brain is growing. And therefore, just got to get them through. When Lloyd was about 15, he's in my study and he's driving me crazy. And honestly, I decided to reread everything I've ever written on parenting. And none of it helped a jot, which is not a great incentive for you to buy the books. I understand that. And I came across something written by an old psychologist, and this is what he said. I think when a boy or girl hits 13, hormonal changes occur in their body, which cause them to blast into outer space. They stop communicating. They grunt at you. He said, my advice to the parents of teenagers is just get them through those teenage years. Fight as few battles as you possibly can. You've got to fight some, but fight as few battles as you possibly can. And normally, when they're about 22 years old, you'll start getting signals from outer space. They're still alive. And most of them land. And I would say to those of you now who are really struggling, and listen, it can be very hard, so I'm not minimizing it. And sometimes there are children, as I said yesterday, with additional needs as well, and it can be very, very hard. But as a general principle, do your best to just get them through. Just get them through. Just get them through. Their body is developing. It's all beginning to change. And understand that the greatest gift, well, what's the greatest gift a parent can give a child? Well, all over the world I've asked parents that. United States, Canada, Uganda, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand. I've asked parents, what is the greatest gift a parent can give a child? And all over the world, parents give the same answer. Love. Love is the greatest gift. Probably is. But there's another gift. And if this gift is not given, a child will never believe they're loved, especially the testing child. They'll never believe they're loved. It is the gift of acceptance. I was in a party some years ago, and there's a woman called Emily there. She was mid-40s. Emily, single woman, and she, I think it's fair to say she was quite a bitter woman. She had a very sarcastic tongue. Her face looked pinched. And Emily was teetotal, and she thought that the punch was non-alcoholic, and it wasn't. So by the time Emily had 3 glasses of this stuff, Emily was talking more than I'd heard her talk in the past 10 years. And we began talking about her childhood. I said, tell me about your childhood. She said, oh, well, I was... And then she went into her handbag, and she pulled out a photograph of a child of about 12 years old. And I look into the face of one of the most beautiful young women I've ever seen. Incredible eyes. And then I look and yes, those eyes, of course, are still there. She said, I was beautiful, was I not? I said, well, utterly beautiful. I said, tell me about your mum and dad. Oh, she said, Dad was incredible. You know what? She said, when I was a little girl, I'd run home from school and he'd sweep me in his arms. And he'd tell me stories before we went to bed. And some nights we'd be there watching television together, and I'd notice that he wasn't watching the screen. And I'd say, Daddy, what on earth are you looking at? And he'd say, I'm looking at you and thinking how beautiful you are. She said, he died when I was 12 years old. I said, you must miss him terribly. She said, oh, I do, because my mother loved me with the wrong kind of love. I said, whatever do you mean? She said, well, my dad loved me anyway, but I could never be good enough for my mother. If I came second in school, she told me if I worked harder, I could come first. If I came third in the race, she told me if I really trained more, I could break the tape. She told me my skin was scaly because I didn't have oil, and my hair was thin because I didn't walk in the wind enough. I could never, ever please my mother. She said, when I was 16, I saved for 6 months for a dress for the school prom. And I came downstairs in it, and she looked up at me and she said, Emily, it makes you look cheap. She said, I went into my bedroom, I got a pair of scissors out, I cut it into 100 pieces. I said, oh, is your mother still alive? No, she said, she died not very long ago. I was at her bedside when she went. She said her last words to me were, Emily, your glasses are on crooked. Did that woman love Emily? Of course she did. She may have been prepared to give her life for her. Did she accept her? No. And it's hard to feel loved. The greatest power on earth is love, and hard on its heels is acceptance. A friend of mine is the theologian, Dr. R.D. Kendall. He said, I remember running home from school. He said, I ran up the drive. I was panting, had a piece of paper. Dad, he said, I came second in the music exam in my whole county. And he said, my father said, won't you ever come first? It's easy to make that mistake. Do you know, I remember when Lloyd was young, he's about 14. He said to me one day, and we're really very close. He said to me, Dad, when I was little, I sometimes used to think you loved Katie more than me. And you know, I understand that. I said, son, whenever there was trouble, you were in the middle of it. And I now understand that Katie, little sneak, used to shove some of her trouble onto you. In fact, I once heard him give a friend this piece of advice. If your sister hits you, never hit her back straight away, because they always catch the second one. In a minute, I'll show you a little book that Lloyd and I wrote together. And you know, you might be sitting there thinking, oh, you know, I got it wrong there too. And there's a lovely verse tucked away in the Old Testament, book of Joel, I think it is. Well, I know it is. And it says this: He can give you back the years the locust has eaten. Sometimes God can do things that we can't do. And although we may have made mistakes, and however old our kids are, and some of your kids are quite old, it's never too late to say, I love you. I was talking once to 1,000 church leaders, and I told the story that a woman wrote to me after I wrote the book, Bringing Home the Prodigals. She had my daughter left when she was 18. She turned her back on us and God. She walked out. For 6 years, we didn't know whether she was alive or dead. And as I went to bed at night, I said to my husband, don't leave all the lights off. Leave the porch light on. And she said, every Christmas, I put a little Christmas tree outside the door, as we used to when she was a little girl. And she said, you know what, Rob, when she was 24, she came home, both to us and to her faith in God. And she said to me, Mum, I was too ashamed to come home. I wanted to come home, but I was too ashamed to come home. But you know what? Some nights in the early hours of the morning, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, I'd drive into our street and I'd sit there in my car looking at the house. And every house in our street would be dark, apart from our house. And I knew you left the light on for me. And some Christmases, I'd sit outside the door and I knew you put the Christmas tree there for me. And ladies and gentlemen, I've said to parents all over the world, don't ever give up hope. Keep on praying. Always leave a light on. Always. And some of your kids are breaking your heart. And they've turned your back on everything you believe. And somehow, by God's grace, I'm telling you, some of your prodigals are not that far from God as you think. They're a long way from your particular Christian culture, but that never was the big deal. Somehow you got to leave that light on. Never too late to try to say, I love you. And I was talking to these 1,000 church leaders. I think I just told that story. And I told the story of a man that rang his daughter one day. I think she was mid-20s. And he said, darling, you have turned your back on everything we'd ever believed and hoped. You're not living your life in exactly the way we wanted you to, but I'm ringing you now to tell you that we love you. Forgive us if we've ever given you the impression that's not the case. We love you. This home is always open to you. And I turn, and the chairman, quite a well-known church leader, is in tears for his own daughter. This is life. This is the Father. The greatest gift. And then the sheer power of words. Do you know, when I was about 15, I started a pop group. Anybody here ever heard of a group called Amen Corner? Thank you. Good. We got some Amen Corner. Well, when I was 15, I started this pop group called the Blue Jets. I was a rubbish rhythm guitarist. We had a rubbish bass guitarist. And we had a rubbish lead guitarist. But we had a brilliant drummer called Dennis Bryan. And soon he left the Blue Jets and he joined another group. And eventually joined a group called Amen Corner. And when I'm about 19, I'm watching a British BBC pop show called Top of the Pops. And here's Dennis Bryan belting out Bend Me, Shape Me on telly. And after he'd left Amen Corner, he joined the Bee Gees. And about 12 years ago, I discovered he'd written his autobiography. It's called I Feel Like Dancing, My Life with the Bee Gees. And I thought, I wonder if he mentioned the Blue Jets. So I buy it. And I turn to the index, and I'm not there. And I turn to the front, and there we are, the Blue Jets. And he says, I started a group with 4 of my friends, but they were rubbish. And so I left. Thanks a bunch, Dennis. But he's right, I was a rubbish guitarist. And you know, when I was about 55, I thought, I can't learn to play guitar properly. I only know C, F, and G7. I know you can make it fit almost anything, but it's not enough. I ought to learn to play the guitar. And so I went to this guitar tutor, fancy guitar tutor in Cardiff. And I told him that something had happened to me when I was 19. When I was 19, I joined this kind of gospel group, and they were pretty famous, but their rhythm guitar had to go to Canada, and they needed someone to fit in. And they let me do it, but I was rubbish. They gave me a 12-string guitar. I couldn't tune it, let alone play it. And on the difficult chords, I used to just airbrush. But I did a bit of speaking as well, so they let me stay in the group. And then they said to me, we're going to make a record. I told my mother. She told all my neighbors. She knocked on every door, and Robert is going to make a record and so forth. I promise you, we get to the recording studio, and I'm like, I might be 20 by now. 21 even, 20 I think. And we go in there, and the producer says, okay guys, go for it. And then he says there's something wrong. He's got his headphones on. And to my horror, he isolates the instruments. Lead guitar, fine. Bass guitar, fine. Drum, me, plinkety plonk. They kicked me off the record. To a dying day, my mother thought I was on that record. I couldn't bear to tell her. So I'm 55 now, and I decided, not now, but then, and I decided I'm going to have a crack at learning the guitar properly. So I got this fancy guitar tutor in Cardiff, and I said, I want to learn the guitar. And I tell him about being kicked off the record. He said, don't worry about that, don't worry about that. And we have about 6, 7, 8 lessons. And then he says to me, now look, Rob, I'm away for a fortnight. You're on holiday for a fortnight, so you've got a month to practice this song. And I'm looking forward to listening to it. And he gives me Knock, Knock, Knocking on Heaven's Door by Clapton. I promise you, I gave that thing everything I could. And at the end of the month, the skin on my fingers was hardened. They bled. And finally came and he said, okay, Rob, go for it. And I went for it. In fact, at the end, I shook my guitar as I'd seen people on the television do. And I honestly thought he might say, wow. Perhaps he would say even, I've heard Clapton live, but that was amazing. Do you know what he said to me? He said, I can see why they kicked you off that record. Here's the fascinating thing. I never went back. By then, I'd been a senior partner of a 10-office law practice. I'd lectured to thousands of lawyers all over the world. Some governments. I'd been involved in murder trials. I'd written, I think by then, probably 15 books. And I never went back. It's why the book of Proverbs says our words have the power of life or death. Words are important. The words we speak to our children. Catherine Hill, the director of Care of the Family, and I were doing a seminar, Spring Harvest, and we were talking about the power of words, and a woman came up to her afterwards. She said, you know, I got 3 kids, but our youngest daughter is really giving us a hard time, and her name's Disgrace. Her name's Grace, but because she gives us such a hard time, we call her Disgrace. And she said, I realize that's wrong now. And she was crying. I realized it's wrong, and I'm going to stop doing it. And the following year, Catherine's walking along, and here comes this woman, and she said, Catherine, I can't tell you how much I thank you for talking to me about the power of words. We don't do that. We don't bring each other down now. We don't do that. And this is Grace. And there's this little girl, and she's smiling, and she gave Catherine a bar of chocolate and said, thank you. We heard a lovely story a couple of years ago. It was of a friend, again, of Catherine's, who was a young teacher. And on her first parent-teacher evening, she's talking to these parents. She only just started the school. And she said, now, whose parents are you? And they said, we're Claire's parents. Oh, she said, Claire is amazing. Catherine's friend taught cookery. It's amazing. These parents looked a bit taken aback. And she's always on time, and she always does this, and they looked a bit shocked, but they went away. And then about half an hour later, another set of parents sat down, and this teacher said, and now who? They said, we're Claire's parents. And she got it the wrong way around. You know the fascinating thing? The original Claire changed. And she began bringing all the right ingredients. She began arriving on time. She eventually became a cookery teacher. Now, I know that's extreme, and you may say, well, that can't be the whole story, and it's probably not. But I'll tell you, it's part of the story. The sheer power of our words. And then finally, the part of belonging. The part of belonging. Do you know, when Ronnie had been with us about 15 years, Dan had just given birth to Lloyd, so he'd been with us perhaps 13 years or so by then. And she woke up one morning, and this is how Diane describes it. She said it was a lovely, I talk about it in the book, in the new book. She said it was a lovely October morning. The sun was streaming through the curtains. Life was perfect in many ways. I had a newborn baby son, a little girl, and lying next to my husband who loved me. The only problem was, I just whispered to Rob, darling, I don't think I can cope anymore. Could you take 80 to nursery today? Ladies and gentlemen, I remember Diane saying those words that were yesterday. I said, sure, I'll take Katie to nursery. But if I thought that was going to be sorted out that day, that week, that month, I was wrong. Those words ushered in years of darkness for us. All kinds of stuff. Diane's immune system crashed. She experienced something of a postnatal depression. It was diagnosed eventually as ME. I know that's a controversial illness. And certainly we had friends who said to us, a couple of dodgy letters is not going to impress us. So we went through dark, dark years. But you know what happened to Ronnie in that time? He suddenly belonged. He became part of the family. He was helping me make up the bottles for the babies. He was helping us cook. He was helping us. We were trying to get this person through that we loved. And I talk about that in the book. And Ronnie suddenly belonged. And you know what we're looking for as kids, as adults? We need to know we belong. We need to know we belong. We're part of something. Traditions are part of that in family life. It's why Dan and I wrote a book on traditions. Just silly little things. Look, I don't offend you, but your kids will forget the expensive presents you bought them. They'll forget that expensive computer and those expensive holidays. Do you know what they'll remember? They'll remember the night you slept in a tent in the garden. And at midnight, an owl hooted, and you were both so scared you ran straight back in. I was talking to a young lawyer in mid to late 20s some time ago. I said, tell me what made your family life sweet. And she said, you know what? I remember waiting for Dad to come home from work. I'd be about 4 years old. And he'd come in, and I'd say, Daddy, can I sit on your lap? And he would say, no, you cannot. Only girls with black hair can sit on my lap. Daddy, I got black hair. Well, only girls with black hair and pink shoes can sit on my lap. Daddy, I got pink shoes. Well, only girls with black hair and pink shoes and a silver bracelet can sit on my lap. Daddy, And pretty soon, a little girl with black hair and pink shoes, little silver bracelet, and a dozen other things would climb onto her father's lap. And when she was a woman, and somebody said, what made your family life sweet? She would tell that simple story. Traditions. When our kids were young, we used to have something we called a family night. Once a week, they would drag their mattresses into our bedroom and sleep on our bedroom floor. Once a month, we'd have what we call a super family night. We'd all drag our mattresses downstairs and we'd sleep on the lounge floor together. The fire would be lit. We'd eat chocolate and listen to story tapes. Now, there's no reason why people with perfectly good beds upstairs should want to do that, except it's fun. And I put that in a book I wrote called The 60-Minute Father that sold all over the world in 20 languages. So I've had families all over the world dragging their mattresses downstairs. And some time ago, I'm in Canada and I walk into this big 2,000-seat auditorium. There's a bloke waiting for me, and he was waiting for me. He said, you're Rob Parsons, aren't you? I said, I am. He said, well, we did the whole super family night thing. He said it was a king-size mattress. And he said, as I'm bringing it down the stairs, I trip and it fell on top of my wife. He said, as I'm getting it off, I put my back out. I'd been off work for a week. And I thought he's cross. And then he smiled and he said, but it was worth it. The sheer power of traditions, laughter, the little things, belonging. This is the way we do things around here. Every Friday we do this, every Saturday. I do a lot of work with single parents, and money is often tight, but I'm telling you, I believe that the poorest parent can often give the best gifts. When I was at my worst, I think I told you about it yesterday, too busy. And I said, darling, I'm doing this. And again, I put this in the book. I said, darling, I'm doing this for you and for them. And she said, Rob, you're so busy giving them what you didn't have. You didn't have time to give them what you did have. And now finally, these 10 words should be engraved on the parents, particularly of teenagers' bedrooms. Engraved on the ceiling so they see them before they go to sleep and they seep into their soul at night. As long as you've got kids, particularly teenagers, recite them to yourselves 20 times a day. The words are these. Don't take all the credit. And don't take all the blame. Don't take all the credit. Don't take all the blame. As this comes to an end, Awaken kindly said, I can mention this partnership pack to you. I put together these things as a thank you to anyone who could possibly become a partner with Care for the Family. It's my book on marriage. Come to this marriage seminar tomorrow if you can. It's the book that changed my life. It's what they didn't teach me in Sunday school book. How do you handle life when you think you're a failure? Catherine's incredible book, Left to Their Own Devices, helping our kids with screens. And our story box, a box there that you can put your family memories in. But I want to throw this in today as a little extra. If you've already become a partner and you didn't get this, please just get in touch with my office. My PA's Jody, and we'll put it in the post to you. When Lloyd was 17, he said to me, Dad, I'd like to write a book with you. I said, son, you've never read a book. I said, what do you want to write a book on? He said, I want to write a book on how you can be a better father. So we did. We wrote a book called What Every Kid Wished Their Parents Knew and Vice Versa. And then recently I had this brilliant idea because I got 5 grandkids now. I got 5 grandkids. Do you know when Lloyd was giving me a tough time when I was in my study and I told you I read all my stuff and it didn't help a jot? Well, do you know what I did? I shouldn't have done it. I know it's wrong. I did a deal with God. I said, if I can see him with a child that stamps her foot and wags her head and shakes her head and said, no, you can take me then. And I watch him now with little Evie. Do you know, my kids used to have something for their kids called the thinking step. It used to be called the naughty step, but that's not politically correct now. It's the thinking step. And apparently if you're naughty, you get a minute on the thinking step for every year that you've lived. I don't know what the big deal is. 70 plus years on the thinking step would be like a spiritual retreat for me. Little Evie lived her life on the thinking step. She had her meals on the thinking step. They tucked her into bed on the thinking step. She drives her father crazy. And I look up and I think, any day now, swing low, sweet chariot. I took her aside the other day. I said, Evie, come here. You're driving your father crazy, and I'm very grateful to you. And so what we did the book, we did a new version of it. But we asked the grandkids to write reports on their parents. So we'll see how great Lloyd is. And Lloyd's kids write things like mobile phone use, poor. Often uses is on the toilet. Grumpiness, mediocre. Generosity, could do better. I think you'll really enjoy that. Guys, what you do is this. And all the royalties in the books go to Care for the Family. If you want to become a partner, at the back of the form is that yellow form. Just fill that in. Give something a month, small or great. I don't care how small or great it is. Fill it in. Fill your bank details in. If you haven't got them all, don't worry. Just put a phone number there and sign it. And then come to this stand just over here, hand it in, and take the Storybox book, the other books, the Lloyd book. I'd love to sign one for you, actually, to you personally, to mark the day you became a partner. If you're already a partner, go to the purple form and fill that in. And again, bring it over. If you don't give us another penny from now to the day we die, we're indebted to you. But costs go up. You might be able to do that. And if you can do that, guys, it'll be an enormous encouragement to me and the team. And I think you'll have some lovely resources. It's a way of saying thank you and putting resources in your hand. But listen, hey, thanks for being with me. Those of you who have been with 2 seminars, if you want to come to the marriage fair tomorrow, I warn you, it's probably not for the faint-hearted, but it'd be lovely to see you. But thanks for coming anyway. God bless you. If any of you want to become partners, I'll be over here and I'll see you there.